The history of steam railways in Britain is spectacularly demonstrated at the Rail 175 event at the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which provides us with a timeline as we weave through the decades from the very first locomotives to the preserved steam railways of the present day.
Our three-day event was attracted possibly up to 12 locomotives. Of those, 2/3 of them are based here at the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. The guest locomotives are an 040 industrial locomotive, Annie, from the Emsey Railway. We have another historic locomotive that has come from the Lakeside and Aberthwaite Railway, ex-furnace replica locomotive. And we also have a visiting S15 460 mixed traffic locomotive. 6007 Sir Nigel Gresley. The J27 65894. And also the Class 5 locomotive George Stephenson. Bearing in mind the availability of steam locomotives at the present time, it is creditable to be able to have this amount of locomotives working on our railway. We've over the years strived hard to have a large working fleet, and it's come to fruition at this weekend to be able to put this large amount of locomotives on display.
Still in the north, at the Beamish North of England Open Air Museum, our loco timeline begins with the most recently completed replica, the Steam Elephant. Jim Rees, the project manager, explains.
The Steam Elephant replica is, as far as we know, the first standard gauge steam locomotive to be built in the new millennium. The engine was finished in the autumn of 2001. The boiler is a real riveted one, and unlike some of the replicas, what you see is what you get. All those rivets really are real. The original was built in 1815 by Chapman and Buddle to work at Wallsend Colliery. It ended up working later at Hetton Colliery and probably was scrapped in the 1840s. That gave it a life of something like 20 years, which is not bad for innovative technology. The Steam Elephant was almost totally forgotten, and one of the reasons for building it, rather than any other early engine, was that we were trying to re-explain the history of Buddle and Chapman as early steam locomotive builders and challenge the rather hackneyed and, dare I say, boring history of Stephenson doing everything himself. Luckily, this particular engine survived in 5 contemporary pictures, including a wonderful big oil painting of it and a very nice watercolour, which thankfully was technically detailed. The engines were all known as steam elephants, in the same way that later in the century the Americans would tend to refer to their engines as iron horses.
As far back as the late 1700s, inventor James Murdoch made a remarkable discovery, as Anton Bandock explains.
James Murdoch was one of those boy experimenters who was always getting into trouble because he didn't carry out the work that he was really supposed to do. And to him goes the credit for producing the first vehicle to be propelled of its own accord by steam. And this was the steam road carriage. It wasn't a locomotive as such because it didn't travel on rails. It wasn't very large. It was about the size of a motorbike. It couldn't carry even a man or haul anything behind it, but nonetheless he proved that steam inserted into a cylinder whose piston was connected to the driving wheels of a small carriage could propel itself along of its own accord. Richard Trevithick, as the name suggests, I mean, he was another Cornishman, and he improved somewhat on Murdoch's invention. Railways made of wood were being used in the Middle Ages to decrease the friction. So already there was a plateway from the foundries and the coal tips down to the navigable water at Merthyr Tydfil. And I think actually Richard Trevithick went to the owners there and offered to build them a steam locomotive that would haul trucks in place of gravity or horsepower. And so he built this monstrous locomotive.
Richard Trevithick had a number of firsts to his name. The first high-pressure road carriage in Camborne in 1801, the first locomotive in Colebrook Dale in 1802, the famous Pelly Darren locomotive in South Wales, 1804. Arguably, Trevithick is responsible for kicking off the second half of the Industrial Revolution single-handedly.
And he built a tiny little locomotive and took it to London and used it as a kind of fairground attraction. And this little thing, pulling one or two trucks, went round and round in a circle inside a wooden stockade at Euston Square. It was called the Catch Me Who Can. People paid a shilling for a ride, and I think that was round about 1808. After Trevithick, Blenkinsop, at a little colliery near Leeds, devised this so-called rack railway. It was incredibly slow and uneconomic. There was a slight technical improvement on the Penny Darren locomotive in that the actual furnace was in the rear and could be fueled in motion. The Puffing Billy still survives, cladded in wood, antediluvian, and very, very slow and uneconomic. That was another abortive experiment. None of these little colliery experiments were at all successful until the time of George Stephenson. The Stockton and Darlington Railway was really quite an extraordinary thing. A number of coal owners in that area decided to link all their collieries. George Stephenson was engaged as the surveyor and builder. As it was to be a public railway, and as anyone who had a cart and wished to transport heavy goods on it could use this railway for payment of a small toll, then the distance between the rails should be 4 foot 8.5, and that was a gauge decided. And it is still the standard gauge on our fast-moving trains of today, although of course Brunel had other ideas about that.
Brunel's broad gauge came about really as because Brunel decided to start from scratch. His railway was not going to be a carbon copy of anybody else's, and so he looked at the theory behind it and decided that in terms of friction, wheel size, and also being able to fit in extra passengers in larger carriages, that a gauge of around 7 feet would be satisfactory. And of course, in theory, it was a great idea. The big problem was that by the 1840s, the rest of the country had been building railways to the standard gauge.
Yes, George Stephenson, of course, was involved with the construction of this railway, and obviously the initial navigation of the line was undertaken by him. We're quite proud to have an association with him. He obviously was from this area, and to have him, not actually in the flesh, but his work, sample of his work is still all around us.
On the 27th of September 1825, locomotion hauled the first railway train between Stockton and Darlington. This exact replica joins the cavalcade of engines a century and a half later.
Stephenson was instructed to survey and to build the original railway from Whitby to Pickering in 1835, which made it one of the earliest railways in the country for passengers. It was a very difficult railway to build. Not only did Stephenson have to build a special tunnel, which was possibly the first passenger tunnel for railways in the country, he had to go over fens and bogs and lay a track on sheepskins and wattles laid densely, layer after layer, and this is what we ride on today. It was also the railway which had the first rail excursion in the country.
Stephenson's famous rocket, built in 1828, was to have a long-lasting effect on the railways.
This was a huge, great breakthrough. By this time, the cotton kings of Liverpool and Manchester wanted to improve communication between those cities, and they decided to build a railway. It was not decided initially to use steam locomotion. It was George Stephenson who interested the promoters in this, and they were so apprehensive. They said, well, we'll have to have some tests. And so came the Rainhill trials. 5 or 6 serious competitors demonstrated their steam locomotives. None of them were very successful, with the single exception of George Stephenson's rocket. And this was small, it was incredibly fast, and the secret lay in his multi-tubular boiler, which enabled that little engine to get up far greater heat for its size. The London and Birmingham, 1834 to 38.
The line started as the London to Birmingham Railway, driven by boodles or beavers. Men were men in those days.
To be followed by the Birmingham and Liverpool, which overlapped, and indeed the Great Western Railway, London to Bristol, which continued into the 1840s. All of them presented completely new problems for the railway builders. Stephenson had already had problems with Chat Moss, that's between Liverpool and Manchester, which was a swamp, a kind of a quagmire, which seemed to be bottomless. In the end, he gave up and laid brushwood and planks and trees and built a floating causeway.
By 1836, railway mania had taken a hold in Britain. 10 years later, in 1846, there were plans for no less than 815 new railways before Parliament. Conditions for passengers varied greatly from first class, which was a development of the stagecoach, to second class, which was far more Spartan and open to the weather, and third class, which was an invention of the railways almost beggared description. This locomotive was the oldest working engine at Rail 175.
Furness Railway locomotive number 20 was built as long ago as 1863. That's only 34 years after Rocket, and so is important really in the national collection of locomotives. It was built, as I said, in 1863 for the Furness Railway as the last batch of 040 goods locomotives. It's quite strange perhaps to some that it was as late as 1863 they were building 040s. After 7 years it was deemed obsolete to some extent and pensioned off to the Barrow Hematite Steel Company in Barrow, which had been formed in about 1865. It was one of a batch of 4, further added to by another 2 batches of 2, and 6 of the 8 total of the 8 locomotives that were built for the Furness Railway of this type were passed on to the steelworks. The oddity about number 20 was that of the 6 locomotives that were sold to the Iron and Steel Works, it was the only one to retain its 4'9" driving wheels. The others had their driving wheels reduced to 4 foot. It was rebuilt in 1915 with a second boiler with a dome on the middle ring, and ran until 1942 when the steelworks were nationalised and parted from the ironworks and the nationalisation, and the fleet of locomotives, 20 locomotives that were held at Barrow, were split. So because of its poorer condition, it was passed over to the steelworks and ran there until 1960, when after a long career of 90 years in industrial use, it was retired to the local school, George Haskell School at Barrow. It stood there for 23 years in the children's playground. It probably didn't carry many passengers on the Furness Railway. I'm sure it did, but it was mainly built as a goods locomotive. But it has been built back with vacuum brakes on the tender and is able to carry passengers again. We've got a full braking system, and we're looking forward to carrying many passengers in the future on the Lakeside and Haverford Railway.
In the same year, even the narrow gauge railways were looking to steam locomotion.
It was 1 horsepower on the Festiniog line, but in 1863 the horse was replaced by steam. No doubt many Victorians regretted the passing of the horse-drawn train, even though its successor, the line's first locomotive, had a charm all its own. The inventors Brunel and Stephenson doubted whether a locomotive could work successfully on Festiniog's 2-foot gauge. They were certainly proved wrong.
By the 1870s, express locos were getting faster and faster.
Like this remarkable old express from 1873. Called Hardwick, it established a record for one particularly difficult 140-mile stretch of track, which stood from 1895 until 1970. A truly remarkable feat.
In an age of confidence and self-assurance, the Victorians were particularly proud of their railways. They built the 2 locos which pulled the Brighton Bluebell on its recent farewell journey over the original route.
Stepney, built in 1875. There are quite a number of the class still around on various private railways, and they were built for the very light traffic, light trains in the South London area. That's why they're named after places in South London like Wapping, Shadwell. This one's Stepney. There are various others. The Stepney was the first locomotive that we had, and she came up here on the 17th of May 1960, hauling 2 coaches from Brighton. I was lucky enough to be able to join her at Halsted Canes and come down here on that particular train.
Welcome to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway's Festival of Terriers. The Terrier is a nickname given to the London Brighton South Coast Railway engines, A1X class, that were built in the 1870s, and their exhaust beat is likened to the barking of a dog, hence the name Terriers. Our own 2 Terriers, Newport and Freshwater, were built in 1878 and 1876. Freshwater, the older of the 2, left the island in the late 1940s, went to work the Hayling Island branch till it closed in 1963, and became a pub sign for a well-known firm of brewers on Hayling Island. We got that back from the brewers. We paid the princely sum of £1 plus VAT, and Freshwater is now happily back working, as is Newport, which had a similar history but ended up at a holiday camp in North Wales. That too is back as a working engine, and we are very pleased that this weekend at our Terrier Festival we are joined by the 2 Terrier locomotives from the Bluebell Railway, Stepney and Fenchurch.
The Ashbury coaches were built in 1898 and 1900. We have 2 in traffic at the present moment, 2 more being restored, and when completed they are the oldest complete train in the world on the standard gauge.
Built in 1903 at Swindon, the city of Truro became famous just a year later.
Yes, a wonderful old loco, the first vehicle in the world to do over 100. Now this museum piece has been brought out to haul specials for fans.
There's still a little doubt as to whether the city of Truro actually did achieve 100 miles an hour. Keith Beck from GWR put the doubts to rest.
There is a dispute as to whether it did 102 point something or whether it was only 100, but I think there is agreement that it was the first thing on wheels to reach 100 miles an hour.
In the summer of 2004, the city of Truro steamed again after a major refit and is seen here running in on the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Steam Railway. At Rail 175, this Class J27 wasn't designed for speed. It's an 060 tender goods engine designed by Sir Vincent Raven in 1920, from a design dating back to 1906, which in turn was based on a design going as far back as the 1860s. This is a standard Midland Railway outside frame goods loco. The J27s were originally used on heavy coal trains from the mines in the northeast to the ports in the Newcastle area. They moved thousands of tons around the clock. The last J27s weren't taken out of service until the autumn of 1967, when northeastern steam came to an end. Many hundreds were built between 1920 and 1928, and proved very popular with the men who crewed them. After its rescue by the Northeastern Locomotive Preservation Group in 1967, this engine was restored in Northeastern Railway Goods black livery, but was changed to the BR livery in the late 1960s. She represents the typical type of machine used all over Britain for goods and branch line passenger work for 100 years, from the 1860s to the 1960s. The basic design was so successful that other manufacturers used similar machines, which were exported in large numbers to India and Australia from the 1870s right up to the 1920s. Number 29 is a Lambton and Joycey Colliery Company 062 tank. It was part of a small batch of tanks built to this wheel arrangement by Kitsons of Leeds in the mid-1920s. Its overall design is not unlike similar locos built in large numbers by the same builder for railways in South Wales between the 1890s and the early 1920s. The Lambton tanks, as they were known, originally had very distinctive chime whistles fitted, which cost £50 each. When the Colliery Company Board of Directors found out about this, they gave the Chief Mechanical Engineer the bullet for wasting the company's money. They remained in traffic until 1969, when they were replaced by diesels. They still plied up and down the 6 miles of BR track for 2 years after mainline steam had finished in the northeast. 1923 saw the birth of probably the most famous steam engine in history. Designed by Sir Nigel Gresley, this A3 Pacific locomotive was named Flying Scotsman. By the 1920s, the so-called race to the north had escalated between the newly grouped LMS and LNER, who had competing London to Scotland routes. The LMS had achieved a non-stop service from London Euston to Carlisle with its Royal Scot class, a distance of 301 miles. The LNER responded with its non-stop East Coast Flying Scotsman service between London King's Cross to Edinburgh, no less than 392 miles, using 2 modified Gresley A1 Pacifics. By 1923, an A3 engine named Flying Scotsman entered service. By 1928, it had a new tender corridor, enabling a crew change on the move. It made the journey in just over 8 hours. The public loved it, and its success made 4472 Flying Scotsman a household name. The German-style smoke deflectors, which are fitted to the locomotive, are not just there for aesthetic reasons. In a combination of damp weather and the early morning dew, the crews complained of smoke drift. The smoke was literally running down the side of the boiler, impairing forward vision because the cold weather made the smoke hang. Inspectors complained on numerous occasions about the problem of smoke drift. So the deflectors had to go on again. Many times during its long life, Flying Scotsman has been on the brink of relegation to the scrapyard. But somehow, destiny and dedicated enthusiasm has always saved her, just in the nick of time. In 1925, the then Duke of York, later King George VI, opened the first railway centenary celebrations at Shildon. The parade was led by Stephenson's Locomotion No. 1. Followed by this Hetton colliery loco built in 1835. Then one of Sir Nigel Gresley's Type 260s, built for the LNER from 1920 onwards. Another engine built in 1835 was this 060 Derwent for the Stockton and Darlington Railway. The North Star replica, and the Cornwall LNWR 222 Trevithick designed express loco was built as early as the 1840s. Finally, the Gresley-designed Bear Garrett loco was used on the Warnsborough Incline near Sheffield. It was a one-off design in 1925 and was withdrawn from service in 1955. At Rail 175, 828 from the Swanage Railway was put through her paces. Harry Frith was named after the former shop foreman at Eastleigh Works, who led the team responsible for restoring 828 from a Barry scrapyard wreck to a working loco. It was rebuilt to mainline standards in the early 90s. Harry Frith himself died shortly after the restoration, and this loco took part at his funeral at Eastleigh. (828) is a Maunsell S15 Class 460 built in 1926. These locos were designed for mixed traffic work on the Southern Railway and were based on an earlier design produced by the London and South Western Railway, originally designed by Chief Engineer Robert Urey. The class remained in traffic until the mid-1960s. In its later days, it was mainly used for hauling freight. In the early 30s, the quest for speed between the regions and even between continents was reaching a crescendo. The Cheltenham Flyer in 1931 became a legend in its own lifetime, with its high-speed runs from London to Cheltenham. But it only hauled 4 or 5 coaches to gain extra speed. By the 1930s, building steam locos was an organised but still complex business. From the plans, the basic frames had to be cut and lined up alongside its twin. The cylinders had to be cast in a sand mould before the metal was poured in. After cooling, the cylinders were broken out of the sand mould and then bored out to an incredible degree of accuracy. The firebox had to be constructed, followed by the barrel, both needing many thousands of rivets to hold the structure together. Pipes for the regulator and boiler then had to be inserted one by one. The basic footplate controls started to take shape. This is what happens when you open the regulator. By the time the cab was added, the structure was beginning to look like a locomotive. This was a Princess class engine. The all-important wheels had to be cast using a similar process to the cylinders. After fixing to the massive axles, the wheels were dropped onto the tyres. Finally, the locomotive was gently eased onto the wheel assemblies and fitted with its driving gear before being wheeled out of the sheds and onto the railway network.
This is Britain's most powerfulest engine, built by the London, Midland and Scottish Railway for hauling the heavy Scots trains between Euston and Glasgow.
This example of the class remains certificated for mainline working today.
Number 6201 Princess Elizabeth powered over the ever-popular Settle and Carlisle line in April, hauling the Cumbrian Mountain Express.
It is the maiden journey of the new locomotive on the LMS Scottish Run. The engine has been named after Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, and she is expected to break all records.
In the race to the north in the 1930s, LMS and the LNER battled to bring times down from London to Scotland with ever faster and more efficient locomotives. In the same year, 1933, the new electric line from London to Brighton was opened. It was an ominous sign for the steam locomotive.
It is a joy to me to be the official opener of this track running from the great city of London to the near south coast town of Brighton.
Railways go streamline. A recent British rail speed record sets Germany thinking. And here is the result. A new steam locomotive with its engine scientifically encased in shiny metal. It has an estimated capacity of 2,800 horsepower and an estimated speed of 110 miles an hour. And in Britain, a second railway company is out for the steam speed record and has designed this giant engine, a strange-looking monster with most of its streamlining in the nose, a sort of iron balloon on wheels, but a hot favourite for the railway stakes.
In 1936, the LMS Princess Elizabeth set a new record from Glasgow to Euston in 5 hours and 54 minutes. By 1935, Britain's quest for speed to the north escalated when the LNER board authorised the introduction of the A4 class 462 Streamliners on the 28th of March. They were a direct descendant of Nigel Gresley's highly successful A1 or Flying Scotsman Pacifics, plying between King's Cross and Edinburgh.
A regular performer on the main line for many years has been LNER A4 class, Union of South Africa. Number 9 is seen here at Eastleigh at the head of a VSOE excursion to Southampton in April. In May, number 9 made a rare excursion into England's smallest county, Rutland, and is seen passing over the 82-arch Haringworth Viaduct in the Vale of Mowbray.
At Rail 175, the North Yorkshire Moors Railway managed to repair its prize locomotive.
Another fine locomotive that we have based here at Gromont is the A4 Pacific Sir Nigel Gresley. This locomotive was built in the mid-1930s for haulage of the crank LNER express trains from King's Cross to Edinburgh. This fleet was really a revolutionary design in steam locomotive. There was streamlined, possibly he did get a few ideas from the German streamliners, but certainly these locomotives far exceeded expectations of anyone. 6 locomotives exist, and at present time Sir Nigel is the only one in operation.
Right, 1, 2, 3, say Yorkshire Hood.
Some of the many enthusiastic volunteers serve the public in the dining cars.
They became the major locomotive power for the LNER for quite some time. Both before the war and after the war, they put up some fine performances. In fact, one of the locomotives, a sister engine to Sir Nigel Gresley, actually holds the world speed record for steam of 126 miles per hour. That engine is called Mallard, and it is based in the National Railway Museum at York.
With a tractive effort of 35,455 pounds, 80-inch wheels, 71 feet long, and 5,000 gallons of water in the tender, the A4s were real thoroughbreds of steam.
also it has got a big following of fans, that type of locomotive, and it does hold the post-war speed record itself of 112 miles per hour in 1959.
Come to me, Helga.
I'm here.
Come to me.
And it brings a lot of people to the railway. It is a major attraction at this line.
My Fraulein.
One of these days.
Sir Nigel Gresley was finally withdrawn from British Railways in 1966 for preservation by the A4 Society. Back in 1938, the LMS celebrated its centenary at Euston.
The Lion, itself 100 years old, gets steam up at Euston. In the driving cab are Lord Stamp, chairman of the LMS, the Mayor of St Pancras and the Lord Mayor of Birmingham. The line started as the London to Birmingham Railway, driven by poodles or beavers. Men were men in those days. A 100 years of letting off steam have made our stations what they are, but the Lion's all right and can still do 30 miles an hour, in a horizontal direction, of course. Following is the Duchess of Gloucester, a streamlined 20th century model. Shipping the Coronation Scott engine at Southampton is quite a job, for it weighs 100 tons. Driver Bishop and Fireman Carswell are there to see it put aboard. As the locomotive is lifted from the quayside by the ship's derrick, the vessel takes a heavy list, but rights herself again as it's swung over the hold. The ship that takes it across, by the way, is Norwegian. The train is going to America to tour the country and to be on show at the World's Fair.
By 1940, Britain and BR were feeling the full force of Nazi aggression. The railways took a battering from the Luftwaffe's bombs night after night.
Allied propagandists were upbeat about their own aerial strategy against the moving trains snaking beneath them.
As the North Yorkshire Moors was a military training area, there was a real threat from the air, especially to the city of York. But the railways were vital to keep men and material on the move.
During the war, in spite of the advent of the motor lorry, trains had to move most of the nation's freight. There was no North Sea oil, and most of the oil we imported was needed by the armed forces, so private lorries and cars were driven off the road by the severe rationing of fuel. So on main lines and branches, a constant procession of goods trains trundled along every day and night. Over 250,000 special freight trains were run for the armed forces during the war. People were asked, is your journey really necessary? Passenger trains were accorded no special priority and were often late and overcrowded. This ex-London and North Western 080 carries a special wartime code chalked on its smokebox. This sequence shows the extraordinary variety of wagons used by the railways for carrying goods. By no means were there enough covered wagons, so manufacturers were often put in open wagons, 500,000 of which were commandeered from private owners. They were covered in tarpaulins to keep off the rain, the pilferers and the prying eyes.
You were so busy that as a railway man you were exempt from going to the war. I mean, I was always frightened. I don't know whether there is, I don't believe there are brave men. I think it's just, you know, the action at the time where bravery comes in.
The need was for more locomotives. The United States provided austerity engines, which were very basic, but easy to convert for both Britain and the continent. Railway workers were in the firing line whenever there was an air raid.
There was one bad raid on York. I wasn't on duty that night. I was in the understairs cupboard. I used to always have a favourite spot, you know, and afterwards I laughed about it. Always sat on the gas meter holding the pipe at either side. I mean, why we thought that was safe, I don't know, but you know, everybody used to go under the understairs cupboard.
Even during the war in late 1941, the LNER was testing a new electric train for service in the Manchester area. But practically all of the railways had to rely on the steam locomotive for the duration of the war.
All sorts of jobs on austerity locomotives are done by girls. It was a memorable day at the works when the first engine was completely assembled. It has the standard British gauge, 4 foot 8.5, but it can be quickly adapted to run anywhere on the continent. No time was lost before stoking up for boiler tests. One reason why these locomotives can be made quickly is that they're not built primarily for speed. Heavy haulage between 30 and 40 miles an hour is all that's wanted. When locomotive number 1 rolled out of the works, the Minister of Supply, Sir Andrew Duncan, was on the footplate. He had good cause for satisfaction. While Britain can turn out locomotives in plenty, Fighter Command and the Red Armies are taking crippling toll of Nazi transport. It's good to know that when the second front is open, the Army will have all the engines it wants.
By the end of World War II in 1945, Oliver Bulleid produced his West Country class 462 for Southern. 109 were built over the next 5 years, making them the most numerous Pacifics in Britain. The first 48 were given West Country names. The rest were named after the Battle of Britain. 257 Squadron is based at the Swanage Railway in Dorset. The engine was one of a batch built in 1948, just after railway nationalisation on the 31st of December 1947, when British Railways was finally owned by the British public. The Bulleid Light Pacifics had a number of innovations. Welded boilers, fireboxes made of steel instead of copper, which made them wonderful steam raisers and easy to maintain, and disc-type wheels with holes instead of spokes. An identical design from Oliver Bulleid is number 34101 Heartland, based at the North Yorkshire Moors Railway and built in 1950. It's another version of the Bulleid Light Pacific 462. The Bulleid Pacifics, as designed, had chain-driven valve gear, which was only efficient when the locomotive was ex-works. In traffic, the valve gear could prove troublesome, as it tended to stretch through its oil bath, which in turn sometimes led to fires. In the mid-1950s, it was decided to rebuild both the Merchant Navy class and the Light Pacifics using Walschaerts valve gear, which to a large extent improved the locomotive. All the Merchant Navy class were rebuilt by 1959, followed by 2/3 of the Light Pacifics before the programme was cancelled in 1961. Heartland is an example of one of the Light Pacifics rebuilt in the late 1950s.
The locomotive behind me is a Stania Black 5. 842 of these were constructed. This one is unique in the class. It is fitted with a Stephenson outside link motion. The vast majority of the class were built by the Belgian Volchart gear. Some of them also had Caprotti gear. Well, in my experience, the Caprotti geared engines were not the equivalent of the Volchart, and certainly not anywhere near as powerful as this locomotive behind me, which we consider to be the strongest Black 5 ever built. I was fortunate enough many years ago to be the fireman on this locomotive when it was operating on British Railways. For an hour, I think. It was based then at a shed in Liverpool at Bankhall, and I was at Lostercall near Preston, and I got on it quite a lot. Not on heavy trains, unfortunately. We used to use them on Southport to Liverpool stopping trains, only 4 or 5 coaches, well within its capacity. We have had it here now approximately 20 years. Personally, it is my favourite locomotive. I enjoy driving it, I enjoy firing it, as do most of the staff here. People find it easy to drive, easy to fire. She's now 53 years old, the same age as myself, and I feel that we have certain things in common with each other.
Blue Peter is an A2 462 built at Doncaster in 1948.
Blue Peter spent most of its working life in Scotland, working the Aberdeen, Glasgow trains. The type of train they were designed to work, they were quite heavily loaded trains on gradients that were quite severe. They didn't really have a long working life before the diesel locomotive took over those services. Consequently, they were downgraded really. So when it was withdrawn from service, it really hadn't done a lot of hard work. Although the locomotive is an express passenger type, the driving wheel dimensions make it reasonably ideal for working the trains on our 18-mile line here from Romont to Pickering, which contains some quite severe gradients with tight curves and quite large loaded trains really. We do take 8 and 9 coach trains. The dining car train is equal to 9 coaches. So there is quite a reasonable load behind the locomotive, and it finds working here, it really does handle them with ease.
Another loco based at the North Yorkshire Moors and part of the 175th Gala is this LNER Thompson Peppercorn K1 260, built by the North British Locomotive Company for the nationalised British Rail in 1949. 1951 is a mixed traffic design, which was used for both goods and passenger traffic, mainly in Scotland and the northeast. This particular engine, 62005, was the last member of the class in traffic as late as 1966, when it was purchased by Lord Garnock as a spare boiler for his K4. It survived to be sold on to the Northeast Locomotive Preservation Society and is now fully restored to its former glory.
Okay, this is Errol Lonsdale, 060 Hunslet Austerity. It's based on the original London North Eastern Railway J94 class. It was built in 1953 at the Hunslet Engine Works in Leeds. The locomotive was only named Errol Lonsdale after the commanding officer in about 1969, just before the facility at Longmoor closed, but it was used to train sappers for the operation of militaries under wartime conditions. It appeared in several films. It was actually the Great Centurion train robbery, which was filmed in the 1950s with Frankie Howard and co, and also appeared in the film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Just a few short months before Rail 175, artist, conservationist and locomotive owner David Shepherd sold his beloved Green Knight to Peter Best, who had it refurbished by the North Yorkshire Moors Railway.
Well done, Peter.
Without this man, it would be razor blades.
I hark back to 1967 when I paid just £2,500 for this. It was brand new, and that was her scrap value. And if I hadn't bought it, she'd have gone the way of so many other engines. She'd never been near a scrapyard. She was straight out of service for me. When I rang up BR and said, can I buy a steam engine?
The engine is secure now, certainly for the next 10 years, because we restored it to a very high standard, but it is also certified to run on the main line. So it was bought partly to take it to Whitby, and who knows, maybe further afield as well, on behalf of the North Yorkshire Moors Railway.
But it's very emotional, thanks to Pete Best and the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, but Pete Best personally, to see this back in steam. Straight out of X-Works, just as she came out of Swindon Works. Last time I saw Green Knight, she was on the East Lancs Railway, a wreck, and I never thought she could ever be restored. Now look at her. So it can be done, as long as we face up to the future.
Green Knight was built in 1954.
There's no room for sort of airy pie in the sky people now who think, oh, money's going to drop out of the sky, because it doesn't anymore. The days of sugar daddies are over.
(1955) saw the Modernization plan for British Railways, which called for the replacement of steam.
One outstanding item in the modernisation of British railways is the new Deltic diesel-electric locomotive. It's reported that over 20 of them, the most powerful of their type in the world, are being ordered, and that they'll haul such famous expresses as the Flying Scotsman and the Elizabethan. What a contrast the clean diesel-electric makes compared with the old, smoky, coal-burning locos. The Deltic is capable of well over 100 miles an hour. Not going at that speed here, you say? No, it had to slow down so that we could keep up with it in our helicopter. We shall soon be seeing plenty of Deltics.
Swindon and a new locomotive that's already historic. The last steam loco to be built by British Railways. The official unveiling revealed its appropriate name. Evening Star points to the inevitable end of a very popular age, the age of steam. It's always been locos like this that made boys want to be engine drivers. Evening Star is the last of a long and honourable line, the last of the steamers.
Good old steam locos, nothing to touch them. Their days are numbered and the real veterans are being broken up. Here at Swindon, where many thousands have been built over the past 100 years or so, the old-timers are being turned into scrap. Rather sad, really, and it does seem a harsh fate after all the faithful service they've given. Most of this lot date from the 1920s, but they won't be quite forgotten. There's a big demand for the old number plates as souvenirs for collectors. Still, progress is progress, I suppose, and British Railways must diesel on. On show in London at a railway engineering anniversary, a fine collection of locos were inspected by Prince Philip. Also present were Sir Brian Robertson and Dr. Beeching, his successor. The Mallard set a world record of 126 miles an hour over 20 years ago. Of very special note, a jet-age product by English Electric, this gas turbine loco can reach 45 in a platform's length. The Prince unveiled the diesel loco Magpie. Having once commanded a warship of that name, he now took command on the run to Windsor. Always wanted to do it, he said.
In 1961, Dr. Richard Beeching from ICI was given the task of simplifying the massive organisation of British Railways under a new British Railways board. In 1963, he published his first report called The Reshaping of British Railways.
The Beeching report has been published. 5,000 miles of railway and over 2,000 stations are to be closed. For all of us, some of those 2,000 names have a special meaning. Tonight, we record a few of them.
They're closing the stations with beautiful names. Appledore and Chasewater and Saffron Walden.
The railways had to pay their way.
The plan is drastic enough to make you very unpopular in some quarters. What is your reaction to this?
I don't think that it makes me unpopular among thinking people, because all we're doing is to display the facts of the situation and make proposals for correcting things that are clearly wrong. But in any case, the ultimate choice still rests with the people of the country through the government of the day.
Say railway, think of Beeching. But what do names like the Countess, Ken Nelson, Bob Harris and Laurie Brooks signify? Well, they're all involved in a railway at Welshpool, a railway which is actually reopening. The rebirth of this narrow gauge line in mid-Wales brings a gleam of optimism into the ominous picture outlined by the Beeching plan. Thanks to the local Light Railway Preservation Company, a new passenger service will be operating at weekends. If the Beeching axe falls, this will be the only steam service left in an area sadly short of trains.
If this survey is implemented, how much do you expect to save in a year?
This is a question to which I can only give a very broad answer, a general indication, because we haven't yet planned these changes in detail, and we shall only make the assessments of financial savings when we do that. But for the purpose of giving a broad indication, 50 to 100 million pounds a year.
Are you not afraid that publishing this report now will add further to the dismay of the railwaymen?
No, I don't think it will. Railwaymen are realistic people, and they know that the railways have got to be modified to fit them for the traffic requirements of the future.
In 1963, the Bluebell Railway showed its disappointment at the closure of an important part of the Southern Railway.
Soon the Beeching axe will fall, closing the section between Haywards Heath and Horsted Canes. Nevertheless, the Victorians would certainly approve of our efforts to preserve what remains of their pioneering spirit.
Dr. Beeching departed as chairman of British Railways in 1964. The newly elected Labour government had promised not to implement the Beeching plan, but in reality most of his plans did come to fruition, mainly for political rather than economic reasons. Whole areas of the network were lost. Large parts of North Devon and Mid Wales were left with no rail services at all, but the southeast suffered comparatively little from the plan, with only minor branch lines being axed. Some of them became privately owned, preserved heritage railways, including the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. By late 1965, the steam engine was all but gone.
The revolution has meant the overthrow of the giants of steam, and to commemorate them, the Clun Castle has just made a sentimental journey from Paddington. Steam trains have a fascination that may never be challenged by any other form of transport, and this is the last of the famous Castle class. They were so successful they virtually ran the western region for nearly 40 years. Change to diesel power has replaced over 3,000 steam locomotives between London and the West. Clun Castle's farewell journey to Cheltenham marks the end of an era begun 127 years ago. The resurrection of a king. This 104-ton locomotive, most famous and largest of all the giants on the Great Western, King George V. Railway enthusiasts pull her out of her mausoleum at Swindon before she leaves to be restored to her original regal splendour. She's been lent to a Herefordshire cider company who will have her restored and put on public exhibition. Ironically, this reprieve was within days of the retirement of all steam trains on British rail. Just one engine for whom the bell does not toll.
Today, King George V resides proudly at the new Swindon Steam Museum.
The Coronation Scot, Glasgow bound on a record run of 114 miles an hour. But that is 1937. Now, in this anniversary year of 1975, when steam locomotion is 150 years old, these splendid old giants are already a dream. What massive majesty these old warriors had, and still have. But sadly, the famous old names mean little to a younger generation. Now the selected remnants of Britain's iron horses are on their way to the York Museum. These are the lucky ones. For them, immortality. From now on, they can stand and dream of the grand old days of fire and speed. But others are not so fortunate. The end of the line is the scrapyard, where they die the slow, rusting death of the discarded, the unwanted. Prince Philip is always ready to try his hand at anything, so why not a steam train? Before nationalisation, Britain's rail system was ruled by the Big Four: London North Eastern, Southern, London Midland Scottish, and Great Western. From 1918, North Eastern's 2238, Class T2. LNER's K1, number 2005. The Murray Share, another stalwart of the past. A Stania tank that once belonged to Great Western.
Get this one.
Built in 1938, this is a Great Western locomotive. The Henry Oakley took part in the 1925 cavalcade. Almost like a toy, the Wantage tramway engine of 1857. A complete contrast to the computer age. British Rail's world record holder, the prototype high-speed train, which set a record of 143 miles an hour just 2 years ago, represents the brave new world of locomotion. Today's generation will never know the full majesty of steam. But the most famous of them all, the Flying Scotsman. The epitome of all that a massive steam engine should be, noble, powerful, fast. A champion bearing the torch for an age that will never come again.
Another line to reopen in 1975 was the fledgling West Somerset Railway.
Closed by British Rail 5 years ago, the Minehead Blue Anchor line seemed dead and buried. But a government-financed rescue operation has set the wheels rolling once more. Lord Montague of Bewley does the honours. Just like old times again. Steam's up, Blue Anchor, here we come. The West Somerset Railway Company plans to extend the line by the end of the year to Taunton, not only to fulfill the job creation programme, but to make the line pay. Rail lines all over the country are threatened with permanent shutdown. How refreshing to see this particular phoenix rising from the ashes. London's most famous railway terminus celebrates 125 years of service. Although the present station, designed by master engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel, dates back to 1854, Paddington began as a railway terminal 16 years earlier. To mark the occasion, one of the most famous steam locomotives of the 20s, King George V, comes out of retirement. This wonderful old giant was the first of 30 to be built in 1927 to haul the heavy Great Western expresses. Today, in carriages of the 1950s, it will carry enthusiasts on a nostalgia run to Didcot. A gift from the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the American Type Bell. But even that short run has been too much for old bones. King George V, overheating an axle box, faces the final indignity of being taken to Swindon for repair by lorry.
Sir Nigel Gresley was at the 150th anniversary of the Rainhill trials in 1980.
It was a unique celebration of railway history, including the Lion, built in 1838 and the world's oldest working steam locomotive. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway was the first intercity service, but the cavalcade was delayed for more than an hour when some exhibits found the going far from easy. The replicas of two of the first Rainhill locomotives, the Rocket and this one, the Novelty, came off the rails and couldn't make a scheduled appearance under their own steam. But there was still plenty to see. There were the giants of the steam age, like the Flying Scotsman, perhaps the most famous of all locomotives. Also there was the Evening Star, which marked the end of steam power on British Rail. They were replaced in the 60s by a technology just as revolutionary as the rocket in the last century. And today, the advanced passenger train can take 50 minutes off the journey between London and Glasgow, a clear indication of how far railways have come since those first Rainhill trials 150 years ago.
It's rough, you know, we're fed up with it, it's boring, there's nothing to see, the diesel just goes whiffing by and there's nothing in it, nothing at all. And it's just deadly. And so the more we go on, the more years as diesels, the more you look around for steam engines, because you're so bored.
One place that's anything but boring is the Barrow Hill Roundhouse.
It is the last operational railway roundhouse in Great Britain now. This is the only place you can see the activity behind you, and that's what makes it unique, really. Well, it was built in 1870 by the Midland Railway, and it was primarily built to service the big iron and steelworks across the road with locomotives for their extensive railway line. It was re-roofed in 1955. The British Rail departed in 1991, which is where we started a campaign to get the council involved, raise the money to re-roof it, rewire it, etc. Been a long, hard slog. I started the project around about 88, 89 when I first heard of its closure, and we eventually started re-roofing the building in 97. And here we are today, full of locos, 2 years later. So it's been a long, hard slog, but it's been a great achievement.
During the 3 days of the Rail 175 Steam Gala in October of the millennium year, the North Yorkshire Moors Railway ran many double headers. All credit to the event must go to the chairman, Roger Heath, but what does the chairman actually do?
His prime purpose is to be a dog slotty, to take up everything that nobody else seems to want to do. But that said, I see my job as being here so that any member, any volunteer or ordinary member can talk to me and raise problems which I try to solve. I think it's important that we have somebody, and it's not always me, with a flow of ideas which will keep this railway developing and going towards the future. There are problems because undoubtedly at Gromont the level crossing does cause an inconvenience. However, there's no doubt that it causes an inflow of money to both Gromont and Goathland and Pickering, which they really couldn't do without. This is the best job anybody can have. It makes me proud to see the trains go out or to travel on the trains and to see the traffic. Last week we had the Prince of Wales visit and I looked at what was going on and I thought, this is wonderful.
In the new millennium, the preservation of steam goes on apace, from the narrow gauge railways like Llanelli in Wales.
The Llanelli Railway Preservation Society was the first in the world, and therefore preservation started here. It all started here. It was opened in 1865 to carry slate down from Brynegwyrs quarries, which are way up beyond the end of Nantgwernal, which is the end of the line, and bring it down to Towyn Wharf. The wharf was a railway wharf, not a sea wharf, and the slate was transshipped at Towyn, run down the coast to Abu Dhabi and then loaded into sailing ships. So basically the line was to bring slate down as cheaply as possible. was the first railway to be preserved. It never stopped running. It was continuously operated, although it may have been 2 days a week towards the end. It was the first railway or first preservation scheme that broke the myth that you need the government to be in everything to get it working. And to the people who operate it, it's got its own magic because they come back year after year after year.
Still in Wales, the Festiniog Light Railway runs from Festiniog down to Porthmadog. Some of the engines are unique Fairlie locomotives. Festiniog claims to be the oldest independent railway company in the world. Building work is well underway to link up with the West Highland Railway, which will enable passengers to travel from Festiniog to Carnarvon. There are also narrow gauge lines in England, such as Amerton in Staffordshire. All the preserved steam railways rely to a great extent on volunteers just to keep them running. Peter Silver, the chief restorer of the Great Western Travelling Post Office, was busy on the line side, training new operating staff in the fine art of high-speed mail exchange. His colleague, Frank, tells us more about the complexities of his unusual hobby.
This has been transported by road from Didcot up to here and goes back again on Monday. Literally only here for the weekend. Demonstrations today and tomorrow, 9 altogether today and 9 altogether tomorrow. Besides actually putting on the weekend, the other part of it is the members up here, they've got their own coach, which is being restored, is that we can teach them how to operate and to do it safely. So it gives them hands-on experience while also entertaining the public. So we come up a couple of times a year, do a little bit of damage for them, frighten the life out of the odd person or two, and then go away and come back again and help put it back together again. that never happened on the TPO. It's nice to come somewhere else. A nice long piece of track as well. Personally, this is the most dangerous operation you can do on preserved railway, because you are actually working by an open door, and all you've got to stop you falling out is an iron bar, and that is all you've got to stop you from going out at 20 mile an hour. Be done under the convex and under set rules and regulations, which we have got. There are rules and regulations for operating on the coach, which we call in the air or on the ground. There is set procedures for doing everything. The coach was rebuilt in 1940. She was involved in an accident outside Swindon at a place called Hay Lane during the war, but this coach itself, as it stands, is a 1940 rebuild. When they actually found her, she was being used on the Southern for carrying spares for diesels. Before that, she was on the Great Western Route, and then she did move around the country a little bit, and then ended up as a spares van. So when they actually got the coach, most of the doors were not visible as they are now. The operating doors, a lot of them were panel boarded over, so they knew what they had, but anybody else like myself first looking at it wouldn't have a clue, because it just looked like an ordinary coach that was carrying stuff about. She's the only coach with two nets as well. I've spent all day on the coach today. Tomorrow I'm on the ground all day. People I had on board training, working the coach today, tomorrow they're on the ground, and they will be trained up on the workings on the ground tomorrow. She's due to come out possibly in the next year or so for a repaint. I mean, she does look quite good now, but she's getting on a little bit in terms of paint wear, so she could do a little splashing up with a bit of colour. It's a working coach. She's always been a working coach and always will be a working coach. If I don't enjoy doing something, I won't do it. I'm very stubborn at it. And this I enjoy. A hobby is here to be enjoyed.
Goods trains have also been preserved on many of the standard gauge lines all over Britain. Carrying paying passengers on the mainline network can sometimes be a tricky business, as Jill Trousdale explains.
We've called ourselves Steam Nightmares for today. We had rather horrendous delays and lost half our passengers, but those that have stayed with us I think have had a pretty good day. I think most of them would admit to it. First thing this morning I got a call at about 8:30 from Clive Holliday, who's the engineer looking after the engines at Mid-Hansel Watercress Line, and he said we had a problem with the diesel. in that it had been failed between Rockley and Alton before it went out onto the main line. The next plan was to get a diesel from Didcot to come and rescue the train and get the train up to London. That just took a lot longer than anybody had, I think, well, perceived in the beginning. The thing that came to light finally was that the best option seemed to be to change our route today and go actually to Salisbury instead of Canterbury. And that meant taking our passengers on a service train to Woking initially, and although it ended up being Brookwood.
I knew things weren't looking right. We normally know when steam locos arrived, and generally there was no sign of it. So I thought something was slightly amiss, slightly disappointed, but then they said they were going to reschedule everything, and those who wanted to carry on to Salisbury. I was reasonably pleased after a while.
I'm very pleased it's not totally cancelled.
We collected the stragglers and got most people to the pub in Brookwood in order to wait for the train, and there we put a credit card behind the bar and let everybody have almost as many drinks as they wanted. Finally, at about, I think it was about 20 to 4, Bodmin came into Brookwood Station, and all of our passengers had been incredibly patient, all of the passengers that were still with us, which I think was probably about 50% at this stage, had been incredibly patient, and we got on in virtually no time at all and left Brookwood. Next thing we had a panic over was what time we could tell the passengers that they had to be back at the train once we got into Salisbury. We got into Salisbury, we did a majorly quick turnaround, which is almost unheard of. We got everybody off and we got the train shunted out in a matter of a couple of minutes. It then became clear that there was not enough water. The tanker didn't hold enough water to water the train, and so the tanker had to go off to get more water, and that meant we missed our 6:26 path out of Salisbury.
I think the people handling the trip did a wonderful job keeping the people happy that had the delays. Of course, everybody enjoyed the pub with the free refreshments, and they did a wonderful job of taking care of all of us.
They then worked to a 1845 path, which we made by the skin of our teeth at about 1852, I think.
But usually, steam on the main line runs like clockwork.